Welcome back, everyone. So, this week I decided that since last week I did a Bravely Default review, this week I would do a Bravely Second review. So, let's get on with it. Um, Developed by the same people as the original Silicon Studios and Square Enix and imported to the US by Nintendo onto the 3DS. Um, Bravely Second and later is a direct sequel to Bravely Default. Um, and actually has several characters that return um, either as NPCs or as playable characters, with a couple new characters that you get to play as well. You start off with the character of Yu Genealogia as your starting character, and after the opening cutscene, where you find out that Agnes has uh, she is now the leader of the Crystal Orthodoxy, the religion she was a part of in the previous game, and she along with um, several other people are attacked at a meeting between the Crystal Orthodoxy and Eternia to try to, put together this peace deal so that they can iron out the differences they had before relating to the crystals and whatnot. Well, this kind of mysterious figure appears by the name of Kaiser Oblivion, kidnaps Agnes, and handily wipes out the whole group, including yourself. So you wake up in your house several days later, I should say. And you, along with several other members of what is known as the Crystal Guard, get together and decide we're going to go save Agnes. And shortly after that, you get into some um, uh, there's some unfortunate incidents that happen on the way there, and you end up losing both your other party members. But as you continue on towards your goal of um, rescuing Agnes, is uh, Idia Lee comes to your rescue, returning from the previous game. You find a new ally by the name of Magnolia Arch, who is apparently from the moon. So yes, you find out the Luxembourg has a moon, and that there are people living there, and apparently she's there on some sort of mission that is entirely unclear. Um, and you and lastly, you go and get Tiz, who has apparently been in a coma for 2 years. Yeah, from what they say, um, it seems like this place takes place roughly 2 years after the original. So you go, you grab Tiz, and then you begin your adventure to go and save Agnes. And there's a lot of twists and turns that happen between here and there, a few big plot turns and whatnot. But I just want to give you the setup so you know what you're getting into. So so with this being a sequel, what's different about this one as compared to the original? Well, I would say by and large, it's very much similar in terms of how it plays. It has the same battle mechanics, the same job system, same way you gain levels and jobs and whatnot. But I would say everything in the big game has been very kind of cleanly refined and made to function better, and in general is much nicer in how it works. So for example, in combat, it's much easier to queue up different actions when you're using the brave action. So you can take multiple actions of the same type without having to go through the menu multiple times and click each thing individually for each action and stuff like that. Um, and in general, it's just easier to assign actions in combat, and everything flows a little bit better. So in that sense, it's the same. It's just all been improved upon for the most part in terms of mechanics for combat. And Another one, for example, is all of the weapons have been given, whereas before weapons were kind of interchangeable, or you just use whatever weapon worked best for your class. And while that's still the case, each weapon now has specific types of enemies that it works well against. So, for example, bows work well against undead, knuckles work well against mechanical creatures, and so on and so forth. So there's also this subtle encouragement to kind of change your weapons and classes depending on what kind of enemies you're fighting, which so adds a kind of interesting strategic layer to the game as well. Um, uh, Specials have been changed up so that instead of the specials being assigned to specific weapons, specific specials being assigned to specific weapon types, you instead assign the special that you want, and you can just change it to whatever you want. So um, you can decide, I want to do specials on critical hits, or I want to do it whenever I default, or whenever I cast magic, or what have you. And so all of that you've been getting a lot more customization options. And also there's a new system of favorites where you can go into the menu and save your party's current loadout in terms of equipment, classes, and specials and all that stuff. And then you can that way you can fiddle around with things and then just load up your favorites and just go back to the way your party was. That way, if you have a specific loadout for boss fights, you can have one for that. You can have a loadout for certain types of grinding or fighting specific types of enemies or what have you. So that's very nice in that you can just, there's a lot less fiddling around in the menu and messing around with things. It's easier just set things up and then pop back to them whenever you need them. So that's a nice addition. Um, and so, by and large, um, before I uh, I really liked the characters of Bravely Default, and I would say it's kind of the same for Bravely Second, although they since Idia and Tiz are returning characters, they kind of cheat a little bit with that. So you only get two new playable characters, and um, due to you essentially have a communication device that you have with Anya's. So even though she's trapped, you can talk to her while you're traveling around, and she'll give you advice and tell you where you need to go. She kind of replaces Eri in the role of advisor for your party. So. Um, but yeah, the two new characters, Yu Genealogia and Magnolia Arch, I think are both very well done characters, and very kind of in the same way that characters were very well done in the original. I think both of these add something interesting to the party. Yu is this sort of um, very eager, um, uh, very kind of stalwart individual, but he's also someone that tends to have phobias about all the different sorts of things, about heights, about ghosts, about this, that, and the other thing. So he he's constantly having to deal with things he's terrified of. Um, and Magnolia is also interesting in the sense that she is. Um, One, she introduces a new bit of mythology to the Luxembourg universe, and that there's people living on the moon, and she is part of a group that protects the planet from these creatures called balls. And these creatures, it's explained what exactly they are as the game goes on, so I don't really want to spoil it. But there's these sort of when you initially encounter them, they're these sort of creatures from outer space that are very strong, and the moon base where Magnolia was from, um, served as sort of a frontline defense, and you find out that her base has been destroyed, and she's on a mission to find the ball that came down to Luxembourg and deal with it. So, also, she's an interesting. She she tends to like uh, speak in use French phrases a lot of the time, and um, she there's this very obvious. She seems to like you, Genealogia, but you doesn't quite catch on. He's not quite as thick as Tiz is, though, with Agnes. Um, that's an interesting dynamic between those two, because you doesn't quite understand what Magnolia is getting at, and there might be some sort of Magnolia might be under some impression about what the relationship is and that kind of thing that you isn't quite catching on to. So that's just kind of cute between the two of them. Um, so you have these new characters, and I feel, and without really getting into the story, I felt like the story overall this time was very solid throughout, from beginning to end. It didn't have the, oh, it was good for 75% of the game, and then fell off right at the end. It was solid. It had an interesting. The plot twist was interesting. It kind of still played around a bit with the kind of Lux and Dark and alternate dimension stuff, but it did it in a very different way. So I thought that was nice. It kind of doing a similar thing to the original, but taking its own spin on it and doing something unique with it. Um, so so the big changes, I would say, with the game mechanics itself would be the jobs. There are a lot of new jobs, a lot of they cut several of the old jobs, and how you get jobs is a bit different than before. So, like before, when you fight bosses, particular bosses, and defeat them, you get their asterisk and you get their job, and then you can start training as that job. So from uh, so there are the bosses that you will fight naturally as you encounter. Uh, sorry. Um, as you encounter the main story, and so there are those, and those are going to be all of the new classes. So, for example, one of the very first one you get, the first two you get are Wizard and Charioteer. Wizard is kind of like a black mage, but they get each of the seven elemental spells all at that first tier. But what they can do is they have this ability called spellcraft, where they can cast it. They can focus on a single individual and turn it into physical damage, or they can cast it on multiple opponents over a number of turns, and they can also combine that spellcraft ability with other kinds of magic. So with like white magic, or bishop magic, which is another new class, which is kind of like they're kind of like a white mage, but they're more focused on healing, and their abilities kind of scale differently. They're more static rather than being based on the mind attribute and stuff like that. So you could use your spellcraft and combine it with your bishop magic or your red magic or summoning magic, whatever, and create different kinds of effects by combining these things together and creating new effects. So, and the charioteer is someone that is a kind of warrior class that they're unique from every other warrior class in the game, in that they start with like C rank in all weapons, which is strange. But what they do is every time they use a regular attack in combat, their proficiency increases. So once they do a few attacks, they go up to maximum proficiency, which is S rank. Um, they're the only class in the game that can improve their proficiency in combat, and so they can just pick whatever weapons they want and go with them. So I thought that was interesting, and they get abilities that let them equip multiple weapons in like their helmet slot and their chest slot and stuff like that. So lots of fun new classes. there's one called a Catmancer, which is, yeah, you literally put on like a cat person outfit, and their abilities actually kind of work like the vampire from the previous game, where if you get hit by enemy attacks, you'll absorb the attack and learn it, and then you can cast it using specific items. So that's a fun one. And that was also a nice addition because in the previous game, the vampire class you got towards the end of the game, whereas this one you get fairly early on, so you can learn all of those abilities as you go along the game. You don't have to go back to areas necessarily to get those abilities per se. So that's nice. And the way they do side quests in this game is a bit different. Whereas in the previous game, you would go do a side quest and follow the trail until you got to the boss and defeat the boss, and then you got their asterisk. This one plays it a little differently in that, like your very first one, um, you have this decision you have to make. And depending on the decision you have to make, you either get one asterisk or the other, because they're the two NPCs are going to be in conflict over something, and you kind of have to choose for them. And whichever one you don't choose, you end up fighting the other one. So I thought that was nice in that one, you had to make a choice in terms of what classes you were going to get, and two, there's this kind of I thought all of the side quests were interesting because with almost all of them, there was never like a clear, besides deciding which class you want, like the moral choice you had to make between the two people wasn't ever really clear. There wasn't ever a clearly, okay, this is the good decision, this is the evil decision. It's more like, these are two decisions, decide which one you want to do. So I thought that was very nice in terms of the side quests. So, um, overall, I would say that is um, very favorable in terms of how it compares to the original Bravely Default. I feel that all of the systems and mechanics have been refined or improved. Lots of little subtle tweaks here and there. If you like the original, you'll like this one. If you didn't like the original, it doesn't really change anything. It just refines all of the old systems and changes, um, makes everything flow better and work better. It's easier to level up jobs, and it's overall there's better progression, and you get all of your all five of your support slots at the beginning of the game instead of like getting it over the course of the main story in the original game, and things like that. So lots of lots of nice little improvements, but nothing has changed radically. And if you're looking for something different from the original, you're not going to find it here. This is very much more the same, but it's good in what they do. So I definitely recommend it if you like the original. Um, I would definitely not recommend starting with Bravely Second because a lot of the plot of the second game is based off the first one, but they do a lot of filling you in on things that happened before. But there'll be definitely be times where you're like, if you haven't played it before, like, who is this person and why are they important? So uh, thank you guys for coming today, and you guys enjoy.